Hey, well, let me get us started, and that way we'll maximize time. These are I'm just starting out with it because we're going to talk about some monastic folks today too along the way. But this is a group from Blue Cloud Abbey where I first encountered Benedictine monks and became an oblate of this monastery and in South Dakota. So Blue Cloud was a Native American indigenous term for happiness. So they call it Blue Cloud Abbey. They no longer are there. The the community dwindled. They couldn't get new guys in, and so they had to sell the property to Roman Catholic two couples and turn it into a retreat center. And they had to disperse to other communities, which was really sad because they built the thing themselves. If I had brought other pictures, I would show you this amazing place that they built. But anyway, it just gives me. Well, I transferred my oblation to Valiermo to St. Andrew's Abbey, but these guys were just great. So this was our oblate director, Brother Bennett, and this is Brother Rene here, and he the abbot said, "I want you to play the organ for our chants," and he said, "I don't know how to play." He says, "Well, you'll have to learn." So 5 weeks later, he's playing the chords, for the yeah. So and then I don't see. Oh, this is Dennis, who became the next abbot. This is the abbot at the time this picture was taken, and then oh, I don't see him here. But one of the monks came out of military background, and he said he said basically it's the same thing. He said just the motivation is different. So anyway, he was great. He's the guy that came up to me one day when we were doing the imprecatory psalm, "Dash their children's heads on the rocks." And when these guys would do the psalms, they would just say each line in a monotone because they didn't want to worry about inflection. That would be putting the focus on yourself. And so they would say, "Dash the children's heads on the rocks." So he came up to me after that day and said, "Does it bother you to," he had kind of a gruff voice, "Does it bother you to say that prayer?" And I said, "Yeah, kind of." And he said, "Me too." But he said, "I think about all the people that day who feel that way and I pray for them." So I thought that was a good way to treat those, what we call the imprecatory psalms, you know. Anyway, that's my dudes. So they're really great. Brother Bennett, I still every once in a while correspond with. Anyway, I don't think this is going to work, so I'll use this. But we're back at the turning points, and this is what we've covered. So if you want to review quickly, but we started with the Nicaea and Chalcedon after Constantine's conversion, and then last time we looked at Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire, the Great Schism East and West, the Diet of Worms and Luther in 1521, and then the English Act of Supremacy, the beginning of what we call Anglicanism there. But what we're going to do today is well, wait a minute. So I guess that didn't work. Hit a couple of ways in which our Christian faith has been nurtured and strengthened, deepened. So 530, Benedict's rule, and then 1540, the founding of the Jesuits. And then 1738, the Wesleys, John and his brother, convert and begin what becomes Methodism. And then the Second Vatican Council that begins in 1962. So those are our turning points today. And by the way, Todd ordered a bunch of the Turning Point books, and they've been brought into here. And if you want one, just put the donation in the coffer out there later. So where the money changers are. And then overturn the tables. So I don't know. Anyway, so let's get started. And interrupt me at any point because otherwise I'll just keep going. So we're going to talk about Christian monasticism first, and we're going to talk about the rule of Benedict and Benedictine monasticism. And so the question is, why did Christian monasticism arise? And some of it has to do with what we talked about last week. Constantine converted, but before he converted, there were 3 centuries of persecution of the Christian church. And when he converted, and in 312, and they came out with the Edict of Milan in 313, which returned church property and said, we're not going to persecute Christians anymore. What happened was the church kind of got locked in with the state, and the church became worldly because now they don't have to defend themselves, and people were looking for high positions in power in the church and so forth. So in that respect, monasticism became a reform movement, trying to call the church back to what it should be. And so that's really kind of how monasticism got started, even though there were monks before that time. In fact, here's a little bit of the migration of monasticism. Um, First, I want to call attention to this dude, St. Anthony. And by the way, there are things you can get to read about these guys. This is Athanasius, the guy that we learned about the first week in the Council of Nicaea, the hero there. And he wrote the life of Anthony. So you can learn about Anthony a little bit from what Athanasius wrote. And what he did is he went out into the desert and Egypt and gathered around him some disciples after a period of time, and he becomes kind of the foundation of what becomes Christian monasticism in many ways. And then there's St. Pachomius and in Tabernice in Egypt. And what he does is he's really one of the first to establish a monastic community. If we were going to do this whole thing on monasticism, we'd talk about cenobitic monasticism, which comes from two Greek words that means common life. So he started common life monasticism. Before that, either you were out in the desert or you established a kind of a central point where people over all these different places would come for maybe worship once a week, but they would stay by themselves otherwise. But he started a community, and so St. Pachomius is really important for that. And then St. Basil the Great, he established the monastic rule for the Eastern Church. And today, they still use Basil's rule in monastic traditions in the Eastern Church. And then there's John Cassian. Oh, by the way, if you wanted to learn about these desert fathers, there's books like this, The Sayings of the Desert Fathers. This is edited by Benedict Award, and it's really cool because they're just short little snippets that they've collected from these fathers. And John Cassian, if you want to read about him, this is show and tell of books, sorry. He wrote the Conferences and the Institutes. And so conferences are like seminars in monasteries. Like our Oblate director, when we had meetings once a year for a few days, he would give us a conference. And what that meant was he was going to give us a talk. And that's what these are. And the Institute's the same. So that's John Cassian. And John Cassian is important because his writings become the foundation for Benedict. And so there's Benedict and, oh yeah, Beck.
The mayor's grandson's name.
Oh yeah, mayor's grandson is named Cassian. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah, which is cool. There was a kid a friend of our grandkids in Vancouver, and they were going out trick-or-treating, and I was introduced to him, and his name is Ambrose, and I told him, you're named after a great bishop, in Milan. So that's cool. Anyway, so all of this is great.
Did John Cashin go by Cashy, like her grandson?
I think, Benny and Cassian probably talked a lot like that. So, well, he lived a lot longer before Benedict in a way, but his writings really affected. And so Benedict wrote the Rule of Benedict, and this is the rule. I have a hardback and a paperback edition, and I'll tell you a little bit about this in just a minute here. So Benedict set up his monastery eventually in Monte Cassino, which is right here, kind of in southern Italy. When we were with Wheaton in the Holy Lands one time, and we got a day off while we were in Rome, actually, with the students. We took the train down to Monte Cassino, wanted to see it, but when we got there, they were just closing up for about a 3-hour siesta. So they said, you got 5 minutes. So I raced around and took pictures really quick and then got out. So anyway, it's also the casino was a big World War II battle too. So the driver felt bad that it was closed, so he showed us the graveyards of the soldiers. Anyway, You don't need to know that. Anyway, so the rule of Benedict, he said, this is just a little rule for beginners to develop monks in school for the Lord's work. That's that's a quote from the rule of Benedict. This is a little rule for beginners, a school for the Lord's work, and that's what it is. And some more about this rule. It's a practical guide for living the Christian Gospels and for the cultivation of Christian virtue for a single community, Monte Cassino. But what happened was, after the Benedictine monastic tradition spread, it got used in all the Benedictine monasteries. And today, it's still the rule that Benedictines use. So for 1,500 years, this has been the rule, even though it started out just for Monte Cassino. The original rule, according to Benedictines, is Scripture. And if you have a certain edition of the rule of St. Benedict, I have a copy where everything that is Scripture is italicized, and you see italics throughout the entire rule. It's kind of like our Book of Common Prayer that Cranmer put together, putting so much Scripture in our liturgy. Well, he did the same thing in the rule. And it became the rule for 600 years in Western Europe, the only monastic rule in Western Europe, especially during the Carolingian Renaissance. And so we talked about Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire, which was part of the Carolingian Renaissance. And Charlemagne said monasteries in the Western world will only be using the rule of Benedict. So it was extremely important in that regard too. And then it's about the size of Matthew's Gospel. So you can read it in one day. The edition I have, I've marked up because a monk in Valyermo put out an edition where he had a reading for each day, and you can go through in like about 3 months and get through it little by little. And it's a masterful synthesis of the preceding monastic tradition. So there were there was especially the Rule of the Master, which is about this thick, and you can buy that today. And what he did was he synthesized all of this stuff and masterfully put it out in this shorter rule, which is more adaptable. The Rule of the Master wasn't adaptable to all different monasteries. And that's why this thing gets used all around the world in Benedictine monasteries. Benedictine vows, so what are the vows? Well, there are 3 Benedictine vows, in addition to what we call the evangelical vows that all monks take of chastity and poverty. You know the joke about chastity, right? A monk was studying in the library one time, doing some research, and he yelled out, "It's celebrate, not celibacy." Anyway, so chastity does have to do with their celibacy, but it has more than that. It has to do with the way that we think and treat our bodies. Poverty for Benedictines is communal. For Franciscans, they give away everything, and Francis lived a life of poverty. But Benedictines, what they do is they bring all their stuff to the community, and it becomes now communally owned. So that's a Benedictine idea of poverty. But unique vows for the Benedictines are obedience, which is mutual obedience. By the way, obedience is in every monastic tradition as well. But for Benedictines, it's mutual obedience. So it's not just top down, although they have abbots, but you're supposed to respect your brother in the monastery or your sister in the monastery and obey each other in that kind of. And then stability. Once you make a vow to a community, you stay with that community for the rest of your life. That's what stability means. It's kind of like a marriage vow in that respect. Occasionally it's broken. A monk, like with Blue Cloud Abbey, one of the monks went into town to get the mail every day. And this farmer lady kind of developed a relationship with him, and he had to leave the monastery because he wanted to get married. So it happens. And then conversatio morum, conversion of life, is what that really refers to. And as one Benedictine sister put it, it's a daily thing. You turn every day. You convert every day. Not just a one-time conversion. We turn back to God every day. That's the idea. So it's a lifelong process. Yeah. Any questions on any of this so far? Yeah. Hanging in here. All right. So, all right. Yeah, you just need a little break. So, monastic traditions.
Ja, så jeg har ikke fått gjort noen ting hele formiddagen.
Nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid. Altså, skjønner du, holdt på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha hjelp på en gang. Vet du.
Ja,
Så du kommer ikke inn dit nå, eller?
nei, men ligger der.
Har du forsøkt å åpne den?
Men åpne den, altså, hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, for hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel?
Nei,
Nei. Vil du ha lyst på en tann?
Nei, det skal være fortsatt.
Ja.
Du bare gjør der. Sånn.
Ja.
Da er vi i gang.
Ja, så langt kom jeg også.
Ok.
Ikke sant? Men så stoppet det opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne,
Ja.
så jeg turte ikke å gå videre.
Ja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner at inni her
Mhm.
så ligger det kanskje flere hundre sider med lagret tekst.
Mhm.
Så for å komme videre, så tar du tak i ett og ett ark
Mhm.
på den måten her. Så liksom drar du over på neste side sånn. Da fortsetter teksten der.
Jeg blar, altså.
Du blar, ja.
Men når jeg skal tilbake, da?
Ja, da bare blar du tilbake igjen. Tar tak der. Og så der. Tilbake til den teksten du hadde sammen.
Ok, så den slutter der,
Ja.
og så fortsetter den der, ja. Ok, men når jeg skal avslutte dagen, hva gjør jeg da?
Da bare slår du sammen permene
Ja?
på den måten der. Sånn. Da er lukket der, ligger alt lagret inni der.
Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten her nå.
Ja, alt ligger lagret inni her. Og da, i tilfelle du setter fyr på hele greia, det er kanskje litt sannsynlig.
Ja, ok. Nei, for det er noe med det at liksom, når du har holdt på med skriftruller,
Ja.
så tar det litt grann tid å konvertere til å bla i en bøk.
Ja.
Mm. Ja. Det er greit. Ja, men før du går, du bare gå gjennom en gang til. Altså, jeg åpner
Ja.
sånn,
Ja, riktig.
og så, hva du kalte det?
Blar.
Jeg blar,
Ja, blar videre.
blar frem og tilbake. Og når,
Sånn, der ligger det helt.
ja. Og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den.
Oi.
Flott. Kjempefint. Ja, men du, nei, ikke sant? Nå er den sånn igjennom.
Åpne fra andre siden.
Så det er ikke likegyldig, det, altså.
Åpne fra den siden der. Sånn. Der. Der nå.
Ja vel.
Har du lest manualen, eller?
Manualen? Jeg skal følge med som manualen, så brukerveiledning.
Stemmer.
Å ja, den ja. Samme problemet. Får du komme?
Anyway, I thought you'd like that. It's a little brief respect. But one of the reasons I like Benedictines is, and they're probably, I think it's safe to say, the most populated monastic tradition in the Western world today. So they're all over the place. And one of the reasons I like them is there are some monastic traditions that are cloistered. We met when I was going to seminary in Deerfield, Illinois. We were going to a Bread for the World meeting, and we were supposed to pick up a nun. When they're cloistered, they're usually referred to as nuns. Benedictines don't use that word. And we had to pick her up, and she was just recently allowed to leave the cloistered monastery. Otherwise, she had been cloistered in that monastery, not allowed to leave for years. So, but the Benedictines are more socially conscious and so forth. So a lot of the sisters have put together the Benedictine Coalition for Responsible Investment. And I get this just about every quarter, and they go to all kinds of corporate meetings. They buy stocks in corporations so they can go to the corporate meetings and vote and make amendments and so forth to the way they conduct their business, to bring a Christian emphasis to corporations. So that's kind of cool. So that's just an example of Benedictines and why they're a turning point, why they've influenced the Western world. So yeah. Well, all right. Let's go to somebody else. Let's go to the Jesuits. All right. We're a little bit later now, and that's because of Ignatius Loyola, who founded the Jesuits in the 15th and 16th centuries. Well, mostly in the 16th century there, born in the 15th century. That's the dude right there. And it's part of the Catholic Reformation. The Catholic Reformation was in many ways a response to what we talked about last week, the Lutheran Reformation. And it involved three elements: the Inquisition, the Roman Inquisition, which was established in 1542, and then also involved the Council of Trent. The church was trying to address the impact of Lutheranism, so it was cleaning up its own house and also standardizing a lot of things in response to Lutheranism. But for us, the third element of the Catholic Reformation was the founding of the Jesuits around 1540. So this was very significant for the movement of Catholicism after Luther. But Loyola himself was he shared some concerns of Luther's. He was a Luther's contemporary, although he never met Luther, but they lived at the same time and shared some of his concern about the church, some of the corruption in the church. By the way, I didn't mention, I don't think I made it clear last week, but when he nailed those 95 Theses on the door of Wittenberg, it was against the sale of indulgences because the indulgences were being sold in order to, half of the funds were going to the Pope, and he was using those to build up St. Peter's. And a lot of the lay people were taking it as you buy an indulgence and you're in heaven. So Tetzel, who was selling the indulgences, said as soon as a coin in the coffer drops, a soul in from Purgatory Springs. So he rhymed it better than I did. But anyway, but he shared some of Luther's concerns. But at the same time, he had a military background. He got injured, and so he couldn't stay in the military itself. But he applied that to the Christian life and a militant Christian life. And along the way, had a mystical conversion. That he should become this Christian soldier, along with a real, significant commitment to Mary. And so that becomes a large part of the Jesuit tradition as well. He developed then this military loyalty to the church and to the Pope. And it really was that kind of military thing. But in 1540, he gathers together some other dudes to join him in this militant monastic tradition. In 1540, a dozen followers then form the Society of Jesus. And then one more point here. By 1556, they have 1,000 members. And by 1600, they're in China and Japan. So they spread quickly, rapidly, grew very significantly. A little bit more about Ignatius Loyola then. He believed that the reform of the church came from reform of individuals. So if we're going to correct some of the corruptions in the church and get it back on schedule here, then the individual needs to be reformed. And that was his concern. So in that regard, he wrote the spiritual exercises, which somewhere here.
Excuse me, was he German?
Yeah.
Was he German?
Spanish, yeah, Spanish. So, yeah. And here's a copy of the spiritual exercises, so you can get this. And this one is a lot longer it has a lot of extra helps in here. Because what it was a manual of spiritual warfare, 4 weeks of meditation, including 3 steps. Purgation, that is kind of purge yourself from attachments to the world. And then illumination, coming to know God better. And then consummation, which was a striving to find union with God, which would become a lifelong project. So that's what the spiritual exercises are for. So like in this book, they have it set for the 4 weeks, but they also have it modified if you want to do it in a different time sequence. And then he advocated, as a result, unblinking submission to the church authority and structure. One part says if something is white and the church says it's black, then it's black. So unblinking of submission to the church and its structure. There's a beautiful prayer here, and I thought I would take just another short break here. There's a group, Jesuits don't usually live in community like Benedictines, but they do have some communities. And one community is called the St. Louis Jesuits, and they're known for, they've cut several albums, one of which we have at home. And there's this beautiful prayer in the spiritual exercises that I'm going to put on here. And I thought if you wouldn't mind, we'll just take a few minutes and listen to the St. Louis Jesuits sing this prayer. And it'll get into your head and hopefully stay there all the rest of the day. So here we go.
Take, Lord, receive
memory, understanding my entire give me only your love and your grace. That's enough for me. Your love and your grace
Bless you.
are enough for me. Take, Lord, receive all I have and possess. You have given all to me. Now I return it. Give me only your love and your grace. That's enough for me. Your love and your grace are enough for me. Take, Lord, receive. All is yours now. Dispose of it wholly according to your will. Give me only your love and your grace. That's enough for me. Your love and your grace are enough for me.
So I just wanted to share that with you. I think it's a beautiful prayer. And that line, give me your love and your grace, that's enough for me, is really powerful. So anyway. So these dudes, as Roland Bainton, he's dead now, but he taught at Yale. He was a great Reformation scholar. Said the Jesuits undertook to recall the errant, to entice the diffident, and to allure the alien. In that regard, then, they became a strong educational, missionary, and political force. And for instance, just think about education. Look at Georgetown and Fordham universities begun by Jesuits. So incredible. And you probably already thinking Jesuits and education and scholarship and so forth. So very important in that respect. And then in mission work, they also were very significant. On the mission field, they were around the U.S. Great Lakes, like Des Moines, it means the monk. and they're in South America, especially in Peru. And then you have Xavier, who is probably the other, next to Loyola, the most significant Jesuit, a contemporary of Loyola. and he becomes called the apostle to the Indies and to Japan. So they're going into those places. One of the things they did really remarkably, but also controversially, is that they were able to adjust their presentation of the Christian faith to the culture in which they found themselves. So, for instance, in places in Japan where religiously and culturally it wouldn't have made sense to the people to emphasize the resurrection, they just kind of left that out. So, as a result, plus they also got involved with some politics, and so they got kicked out of by rulers from 1732 on from every country but Russia. And then they were suppressed by the Pope from 1773 to 1814. In 1773, the Pope said, "You guys are no longer." Then in 1814, the Pope said, "Okay, you're back." But the reason is because it was the Pope and the authorities, church authorities, didn't like the fact that they were aligning the gospel with the culture and the mission culture that they were in. So, but very significant in all respects. And so Jesuits, and they're still around today, of course. I took a calligraphy class at the adult ed school while I was teaching at Wheaton, and we had a Jesuit in there, and it was really cool to, listen to him. And he even brought the Book of Kells facsimile that his dad had given him as a gift when he became a Jesuit. So anyway, they're around, So yeah, Mike.
How was it funded?
I assume through contributions that they get. So that's a great question. I don't know if the church actually has funds for them, but the Benedictines I know, like St. Andrew's Abbey, gets contributions. Also, once a year at St. Andrew's Abbey, they have kind of a lottery. You can buy tickets, and then they draw the tickets, and there are different levels of prizes. So they make a lot of money that way. Oh, and the monks, the Cistercian monks, which are the more strict Benedictines, they're the ones that wear white. Benedictines always wear black. The Cistercian monks in Kentucky, where Thomas Merton was, they used to sell cheese and fruitcake that was doused in Kentucky bourbon and bourbon fudge. Today they just sell the bourbon fudge. But if you come to our house again, we'll give you some. Yeah, you'll get some. So, they have non-bourbon fudge too. But anyway, so they make their money that way. I assume Jesuits probably have some of those crafts too and that kind of thing. So great question. Yeah.
Was Pope Francis? Was he a Jesuit or was he a Franciscan? Was he the first Jesuit?
Well, Francis was probably a Franciscan. I think he was Franciscan. I'm pretty sure, but it could have been Bernardine. I don't know if he was a Jesuit or not. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think there was recently the first Jesuit.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if any of you have seen the movie or read the novel Silence,
Yeah.
those are Jesuits from Portugal.
Yeah.
In the movie.
That's a great movie too. Yeah, thank you.
And you may know, it may have been mentioned because I'm ducking in and out, that Susan Rigby is taking a number of people through the Ignatian exercises this year, and we hope that'll be an annual thing.
Yeah,
So
that's cool.
7 or 8 people going through those. They're meeting right now. They meet right
Oh,
in the
cool.
church at the office.
Cool.
So, yeah.
All of us pagans are here anyway. So yeah.
So the clergy, Jesuit clergy,
Yeah.
would go through this in a month,
Mm-hmm.
4 weeks. But there was a later, what's called the 19th annotation for lay people that stretches it out over 9 months, because most people can't go on a month-long retreat.
Yeah, and
So that's what Susan's doing, a 9-month spiritual exercise.
there's a schedule in that volume I just showed you that does that. So yeah, it's nice. So yeah, I'm trying to remember what Pope Leo's order is. So that he's part of. I'm not sure. He's a Chicagoan, but that's important too. So anyway.
Go to White Sox.
No, that's not good. So, yeah. So anyway, that's the Jesuits, and they're so significant in our life still. Well, let's go to the Wesleyan revival. Get the Wesleyans in here. Woohoo! This is one of my favorite topics. They came around when the church and society was really bad. I'm going to look at some statistics here along the way. But rationalism, state affairs, and a shortage of clergy affected the church. Rationalism, what I mean by that is, for instance, deism, which believed that there's a God who created us and will judge us, but didn't believe in miracles or anything. Like Thomas Jefferson was a deist. He loved the moral teachings of Jesus, but he didn't believe in a resurrection or any miracles. So they didn't believe in supernaturalism in that sense. So that was affecting the church. A shortage of clergy. At one point, there was one clergy person for 3 churches. So they were being, they were absent from a lot of the churches. So that wasn't good. And then societal conditions, poor treatment of the children. That was terrible at this time. Again, I have gobs of statistics on this, but 75% of children were dead by their 5th birthday in the 1730s and 40s. So poor treatment of children in that sense. And the Great Awakening from the revivals that Wesley was part of would take notice of that and deal with that as well. And then gin and brothels were in abundance. So England at one point forbade French brandy from coming into the country, so people said, okay, we'll just make gin. And so household gin was everywhere. That's where we get the phrase drunk as a lord. They had to stop Parliament once in a while because the parliamentarians were too drunk to carry on. And they estimate 11 million gallons of gin were produced in 1750. That was in Britain, yeah. And so, and as a result, the Wesley and his group, and including today, became abstainers from alcoholic beverages. So, and then England was just one vast casino. Gambling was everywhere. And then prisons and punishment were inhumane. Prisons were inhumane. But the punishments, there were at one point 160 violations could result in hanging. And the violations included shoplifting more than 5 shillings, breaking a young tree, stealing fruit, snaring a rabbit on a gentleman's estate, appearing on a road with a blackened face. You would be executed for those kind of crimes. So this was just a terrible time societally. And then the slave trade was rampant. Britain had, by the way, on the punishments, the Wesleys actually rode in the death carts with those who were going to be executed, and that was actually taking a risk on their own lives. And the slave trade, so England got a monopoly on the slave trade by 1713 in the Treaty of Utrecht, and so they were in the leadership, so to speak, of the slave trade. And that was, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, but the Clapham sect came along, and that included some parliamentary dignitaries. But they were affected by the Wesleyan revivals, and they did a lot to stop the slave trade as far as Britain was concerned. So it was not a good time for a lot of this. And then finally, working conditions were deplorable. At one point, they even had 4- and 5-year-olds working, and sometimes up to 16 hours a day. So, and for wages that weren't worth anything. So, so this was not a good time in England, in British society, and that's when Wesley comes along.
I'm sorry, who are the Claphams?
Oh, Clapham, I'll talk about them in a minute. But they were a group that were affected by, most of them were well-off, well-to-do, and some of them were political leaders. But they were social. They were for social justice issues, like dealing away with slavery and yeah. So John Wesley, there's the guy. He lived a long time, as you can see. It's amazing. He said he was a brand plucked from the fire. His father was an Anglican priest, and the house they lived in caught on fire when he was about 6 years old. And he was saved and believed that he was saved for a purpose. And he talked about this later in his life. He was a brand plucked from the fire, and God would have a purpose for him. He went to Oxford, and including with his brother and also with George Whitefield. And Whitefield will become a very significant person with the revivals in the United States. And they got a group of guys together, and they called themselves the Holy Club, and other people called them Bible moths or Methodists because they were so methodical and extreme in their practices, their religious practices, daily practices. In fact, at one point, Whitefield fasted so much that he was close to death during this time. But that's what they did. That's where Methodism, the name, I think basically you could argue comes from. He was converted. In 1735, he gets on a boat and he crosses over to the New World to do missionary work. He will later say that I was really preaching to myself. He wasn't successful, probably partly because he wasn't fully committed in that sense. But along the way, he's on the boat and with Moravians. And Spangenberg was a Moravian leader, and Spangenberg, when they got back, would say to him at one point, do you really believe that Jesus Christ died for your sins? But he was also impressed by the Moravians on board because during a huge storm, they were so collected and calm and praying and singing hymns. So he's getting worked on until finally, right over there in Aldersgate Street experience, he's walking down. Well, the Moravians had still been influential after he got back into England, and I won't go into details, but he also had some bad experiences in the New World with women. Sophie Hopke, he was supposed to be engaged to her, and his fellows threw lots, dice, and it told him that no, he should break that engagement. And then later, when she came forward for communion with her new husband, he denied them communion. So he had a couple of women later too. He was married to. It was not good. Anyway, that's just on the side. But Aldersgate Street experience. So he's walking down Aldersgate in England, and he walks into a church, and they're reading Luther's preface to the Romans, his Roman commentary. And he changed. He just said his life just changed immediately. So it was a pretty amazing conversion that he had. He'll later say that I forget the phrase that he used, but he was told before that he was reading in the Bible, and it said, "Thou art not far from the kingdom of God." So all this stuff was working on him, but the Aldersgate Street. Well, now we don't know if this was a conversion to Christianity from the first time, or if this was a second work of grace. There's been a lot of debate about that. But he leads the revivals in England, and then George Whitefield is doing a lot of this stuff at the same time in the U.S. And what the revivals do is leads to a new denomination in terms of the church, and they become called the Methodists. At first, they're just called the Wesleyans, and then they're the Methodists. Today, there is a Wesleyan denomination, and then there's also a Methodist and a few different Methodists. Because
there's a Wesleyan University, right?
Yes, there is. In fact, I think was he teaching there? The guy that you were with yesterday?
Yeah.
Linval.
And it's actually changing names to, what's it changing to?
The name of a large donor.
Okay. So Linval is on staff there, I think, right? Is Linval on staff there at Wesleyan University? Yeah.
He was telling us there's a big controversy about changing the name. A lot of people don't want it.
Yeah. Well, money speaks. So anyway, there you go. So
church history keeps changing.
Yeah.
And add more turning points.
Yeah. Well, I can guarantee you that the Wesleyan Church didn't get named that because Wesley had a lot of money. So anyway, he really didn't have a lot. Societally, what were the results? Slave trade was abolished via the Clapham sect. So the Clapham sect, again, included some guys in Parliament, and including a guy named, and we'll mention him again in a minute, Lord Shaftesbury. And they pushed and got the slave trade to be basically almost nil. So, and that was a result of this. And the prison system was humanized. There was a guy named John Howard who was influenced by the revivals, the Wesleyan revivals. And so he put himself purposely in prison so he could write a first-hand account of the prison conditions at the time. They were terrible conditions. And so some prison reform happened because of John Howard and what he produced there. And then industrial conditions were humanized, again, especially with Lord Shaftesbury. Hours of working and so forth and ages of working were changed. And that was also due a lot to the Wesleyan revivals. And then the liquor trade and manufacture were brought within manageable conditions. You know, they weren't done away with, but they were brought within manageable situation. And then finally, advances in education and the beginning of Sunday school. Robert Raikes, also kind of a product of this whole revival thing, starts what we call Sunday school. And also education was getting linked with the church, so that was very significant. So Wesley had a lot to do with much of this. By the way, I showed you his dates. He lived to be almost 90, and it was amazing. He would sometimes get up at 5 a.m. to start preaching. He insisted that his, and I'll mention this, I guess, in a minute, but he insisted that his colleagues would do the same thing. They would have to preach at least twice a day, and pray and study the Bible 4 hours a day and that kind of thing. But yeah, I want to talk about his stamina because he was amazing in that respect. Oh, wait a minute, we're going to go back.
Clapham sect was a subset
So
method of,
what was that? What was that?
the Clapham sect was a subset of.
It wasn't a subset, but it was a group of just a group of men who, again, were usually dignitaries and wealthy and had positions of power.
But they were influenced by Wesley.
But they were influenced by Wesley, yes, very much so. So, yeah, just to talk about his stamina too, because I had some statistics on that. His organizational ability was amazing. He finally took a 2-week break when he turned 80. He took a vacation. Other than that, he also had TB in his late 20s, and he was kind of an innovator in dealing with tuberculosis. One of the things he recommended was staying in an open-air facility while you're recovering. And then had some other concerns to help out the preachers that he had. He also, in terms of organizational ability, he established a situation where he grouped people into small groups so they could be accountable during the week in the Wesleyan churches. And then he had a lot of preachers who needed to attend different churches, so circuit riders, and he established, like in a church, would have somebody would give accommodation to the preacher when the preacher was there in town, and so yeah, I mean, it was just organizationally it was amazing, and so that's why Whitefield was a great preacher. They said that he could recite the alphabet and hold the audience in suspense, you know. But he wasn't an organizer. Wesley, on the other hand, was a great organizer, and that's why Methodism grew out of that. So, yeah. Any other questions on?
Do
Yeah.
I understand Sunday school as being because children were working more?
Yeah, Trebekah knows a lot more about the history of Sunday school
Yeah,
than
so
I
it
do.
wasn't Sunday school like for the church's children while, during the worship service. It was for people, and it often happened on it'd be a Saturday or Sunday if that's the only day they were off. But these were factory working children who didn't get any school education otherwise. So it was actually educating the children and also bringing them to Christ. But that was the main thing, was just education.
Yeah. And in the United States, if we had another turning point, we'd go to Dwight Moody because
Dwight Moody.
he
yeah.
did. He really was responsible for this,
Chicago.
the huge growth of Sunday school and that kind of, and education of children. Yeah, in Chicago.
Good thing
So,
for him. Thanks.
yeah, and Chicago also had social conditions at the time that were similar to this. So I wish we could talk about Moody, but we can't. We don't have time. We're just going to get Vatican Council II in here at the end. But just to say that Chicago was bad because there was a guy named William Stead who wrote a book. I actually got a copy of the first edition, If Christ Came to Chicago. And it even had a map of all the brothels. And so, yeah. So, Moody, yeah, 18. It's part of the...
1900s.
no, 1800s, yeah. So, yeah. So, anyway. Well, we'll get the Vatican Council in here a little bit. 1962 to 65, called by Pope John the 23rd. They elected him because he was an old dude, and they thought he'll live about 3 months, and then we'll really get a good guy voted in. And he surprised them. He hung around, and in 59, he had a vision. We need to have a council of the whole church. What? We just thought you were going to die, and then we move on. Anyway, so he said, no, and the purpose will be aggiornamento. And what aggiornamento meant was we are going to rejuvenate the church in terms of getting our life straightened out here. We're going to aim for Christian unity, and we're going to appeal to the social situation in the world and all of that. So, and the idea was opening up the doors of the church to the world, aggiornamento. So he really influenced the Catholic Church at this time. So there were 10 commissions. They were in 4 sessions that were each about 3 months long during this period of time. I remember the Vatican Council II really well because I was in 6th grade after this started, about, 62 or something. And Time magazine had a long article about it, and we were assigned in 6th grade, we had to write a report, like a big, like your term paper. And I didn't know how to do that, so I just started typing what the Time magazine said. So the teacher said...
Now that's called plagiarism.
Yeah, exactly. Fortunately, everybody else screwed up theirs, and so the teacher taught us how to do. My parents taught me how to take notes and make note cards, and I wrote one on birds. I wrote one on birds, as it turned out. Anyway, so this sticks in my mind. Anyway, John dies between sessions 1 and 2, so the council was continued by Paul VI. And of course, that's where John Paul II got his, and the first, although the first only lived about a week, I think. John Paul II wanted to name himself after these two guys. So that's where John Paul II came from. They produced 1,100 pages in Latin, including constitutions, the most important part. There are 3 parts to all of this, insisting that the Roman Catholic Church is the mother of the church and is a sacrament to the world, a very significant statement that the church is a visible representation of God's grace to the world, a sacrament to the world, and then the mother of the church. That was really so. I just pulled out a highlight of each one of these parts of the VC2 documents. But the second parts were declarations, and that included a statement about anonymous Christians. Karl Rahner was the leading theologian at this time, along with Hans Küng in the Catholic Church. And wait a minute, we're going to get to that in a minute. I hit the button. So what VC2 said led Karl Rahner to interpret it as saying that there are anonymous Christians. And what he means by that is there are people in the world who have never heard of Jesus Christ. They may be, in some cases, even antagonistic toward the Christian religion, but in certain ways, they have what the church would call a Christian perspective on things, especially if they're in other religions. And that was Karl Rahner's special concern. So a Buddhist might be an anonymous Christian. And so it was controversial in that sense. But that's how Rahner interpreted one of the declarations that the church made at this point.
That didn't mean that they were saved, right? Like if you're a Buddhist that had Christian principles.
Rahner talked about a baptism of desire instead of a water baptism. So he said there may be a baptism of desire and you're not really aware of all that is. So yes, it could be for salvation. Yeah. So yeah. By the way, and I need my notes for this. Sorry, but for the constitutions, those again were the most significant documents. And let's see, I've got those here. Oh, I don't have them. I don't know where they are. I'm sorry. I was just going to tell you guys what the topics were. Yeah, here we go. So for constitutions, those dealt with the church, divine revelation, liturgy, and the church in the modern world. Declarations dealt with Christian education, non-Christians, and religious freedom. And then they had the decrees, and that was the practical implementation of all that had gone on before. And that included, how are we going to relate to Eastern Orthodox churches? How do we relate to Protestants? And so instead of talking about Protestants as heretics, now they were called separated brethren. That's a huge difference, huge change in the Catholic Church. Then they especially talked about the collegiality of bishops, kind of not reducing completely the hierarchy of the Pope, but of course, but arguing more of the collegiality of all the bishops. And so that was really important. So very significant for changing the Catholic Church. And also, along the way after Vatican Council II, changing the liturgy and putting it in vernacular of people rather than Latin. So that was really significant. The church has made incredible changes, I think, I would argue for the good that time. I remember my best friend across the street had to go to confession every, I guess it was Friday night or Saturday night. And so, yeah. But they don't do that anymore. So they're encouraged to do it at least once a year, if not twice a year. So, yeah.
Did it make the Catholic Church more inclusive then? Is that what you're saying?
Inclusive in what sense?
Well, the Catholic Church was exclusive in that if you're not a Catholic, you're not.
In a sense, yeah, it kind of opened up. There's still Catholics who are non-inclusive in that sense, but yeah, it did, and that's why calling Protestants separated brethren was just an incredible change in terms of how they related to ecumenically, and that was part of John the 23rd's mission, was to focus on the unity of all Christendom, of all Christianity. So
It's still somewhat. It's still like controversy within the church, right? There's like a traditional Catholic movement, right?
Yes.
Called trad cats.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Mass, right?
Yeah.
And things like that. It's still
There are more conservative groups.
More conservative in
Yeah.
that sense.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
It's still an ongoing reform in a sense, right?
Yeah. I have a fellow Red Cross spiritual care guy who's from Chicago, and he gave me a rosary last time we were together in Maui. So he's trying to convert me, but he's really nice about it. So
No inquisition.
no inquisition. So yeah.
Yeah, that is a big change, because I remember when I was in Italy, last time I went into an Ignatian church, and they have a lot of statuary around, and there was a big scale statue of these angels trampling down someone on the ground.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I went close to.
Yeah. I've been in that church. Yeah. I've been in that church. So. Was that the Waldensian church? There's a. Yeah, but I've seen that. Yeah, it's terrible. So anyway, well, you guys, those are the turning points, and so thank you for letting me share passions that I have, and that was good. So yeah. Oh yeah.